The African summer, the signings that are changing African football. This summer, African footballers did not simply change clubs, they changed the conversation. For years, African players were discussed as talents discovered by European clubs, players who were scouted, developed, and eventually sold. But the 2026 summer transfer window tells a different story. African players are no longer simply participating in the global football market. They are increasingly helping to define it. From Cameroon to Manchester United, from Morocco to Manchester City, from Cote d'Ivoire to Real Madrid, and from the academies of Africa and Europe to some of the biggest stages of world football. So today on BallAfrica, we ask, who are these players? Where did they come from? And what do their signings mean? Not only for their careers, but for African football itself. Let me start with Yan Diomande, the 135 million euro message. If there's one signing that tells us African football has entered a new economic era, it is the story of Yan Diomande. The 19-year-old Ivorian has signed for Real Madrid in a deal worth up to 135 million euros. That figure matters. But the story behind the figure matters even more. Diomande's rise has been extraordinary. He developed quickly through European football and broke through at RB Leipzig before becoming one of the most exciting young attacking players in the game. Remember, he also was part of Florida and played under UPSL in the United States. And now, at just 19 years old, he's wearing the shirt of Real Madrid. Think about what that represents. For an Ivorian teenager, this is not simply a transfer, it's a transformation of status. The world's biggest clubs are no longer only paying premium prices for African players after they have spent years proving themselves at the highest level. They are increasingly willing to invest enormous sums of money in African potential. Diomande's move also represents something larger for Cote d'Ivoire. The country has always produced exceptional football talent. Didier Drogba, Yaya Toure, Kolo Toure, Solomon Kalou, Nicolas Pepe, but Diomande represents the next generation, young, globally marketable, technically sophisticated, and entering the elite environment at an age where his ceiling is still unknown. The question now is, can he handle the pressure of Real Madrid? Because talent gets you signed, but performance determines whether you become a player or a legacy. The second player, Carlos Baleba, from Cameroon to Old Trafford. Cameroon has given the world some of football's greatest midfielders and leaders. Roger Milla, Samuel Eto'o, Marc-Vivien Foé, Alexander Song. Now comes another generation. At just 22 years old, Baleba has completed a major move from Brighton to Manchester United, signing a long-term contract at one of football's biggest institutions. His journey is important. Baleba's development took him through Lille, Brighton, two clubs that have built reputations for identifying, developing, and improving young talent. But Manchester United is a different universe. Brighton can develop you. Manchester United expects you to deliver. For Baleba, this move represents the moment when potential becomes responsibility. But for Cameroon, it could mean even more. African football needs more players at the center of elite European clubs. Not simply some squad players, but players expected to carry responsibility. A strong Baleba at Manchester United could strengthen Cameroon in the years ahead. And that is the broader connection people often miss. Every successful African player at an elite club potentially strengthens the national team ecosystem. The player improves. The national team benefits. The country's football brand grows. And the next generation sees a new pathway to success. Our next player is Ayyoub Bouaddi, Morocco's next generation. Perhaps the most fascinating story of this summer is Ayyoub Bouaddi. Only 18 years old, now a Manchester City player. Let that sink in for a little bit. At an age when many young players are still fighting for opportunities, Bouaddi is entering one of the most sophisticated football environments in the world. His journey is also part of a larger Moroccan story. Morocco has spent years investing in infrastructure, player development, coaching, international networks, long-term planning. The results are increasingly visible. And now, a new generation is arriving. Bouaddi is not simply a talented teenager. He represents the outcome of an ecosystem that is beginning to produce elite players with increasing consistency. Manchester City is investing in a player who has already played significant senior football and represented Morocco at very high levels. But the pressure would be enormous because when you move for a fee of this magnitude at 18 years old, nobody cares that you are young for a very long time. You become an investment and elite football demands returns. Still, his move sends an important message to African federations. If you want world-class players, you cannot depend on luck. You need systems. Morocco understood this, and the continent should be paying attention. Caleb Yirenkyi, Ghana's next midfield generation. Not every important signing arrives with a 100 million euros price tag. Some stories are about potential. And one of those stories is Caleb Yirenkyi. A 20-year-old Ghanaian international has joined Coventry City after developing through the famous Right to Dream Academy and FC Nojalan. And his journey tells us something important about African development. The academy pathways is becoming increasingly sophisticated. Yirenkyi represents a model where talent is not simply exported. It is developed, educated, exposed to international competition, and prepared for professional environment. That matters because the future of African football cannot depend only on producing raw talent. Africa has always had talent. The future depends on producing prepared talent, players who understand the game, players who understand professional environment, players who can adapt culturally, players who can move from Accra to Copenhagen and from Copenhagen to the Premier League without losing years of development. Yirenkyi's journey is a perfect example of what modern football pathways can look like. Omar Mamouche, the African player as a global asset. The Egyptian forwards movement in the transfer market reflects another important reality. African footballers are increasingly becoming significant assets inside the world's most competitive leagues. But this is where we need to be careful. A big transfer does not automatically mean a successful career. The modern player can become trapped between clubs, valuations, tactical systems, and economics of the transfer market. Mamouche is a reminder that the modern African player must understand his career beyond just the next contract because the football business is moving quickly. A player can be valued at 60 million euros one summer and suddenly find himself fighting for minutes the next one. The challenge for African players and their representatives is becoming much more bigger. They need career strategy, not just transfer strategy. So what does all this mean for African football? Here is the important part. The transfers are not only individual success stories, they are signals. Signal number one, African players are becoming premium assets. The transfer fees tells the story. The world's biggest clubs are increasingly willing to invest heavily in African talent, but that creates a new responsibility. African football must ensure that more of the economic value created by African players and talent returns to the African continent. Because if Africa continues to produce the talent, but other ecosystems capture most of the development and commercial value, then the continent will remain the world's talent supplier rather than becoming a true football power. The second signal, the development pipelines matters. Look at the pathways. Right to Dream, Nolsjelen, Lille, RB Leipzig, Brighton. These are not accidents. These are systems. African football needs more sustainable development pathways that connect local academies, clubs, education, international partnerships, and professional opportunities. The goal should not simply be, how do we get a player to Europe? The better question is, how do we build a system that consistently prepares players, African players, to become global leaders? That is a completely different conversation. Signal number three, national teams benefit from elite environments. The more African players compete at highest level, the greater the potential benefit to the national team. They return with experience, tactical knowledge, professional standards, mental resilience, and the confidence that comes from competing at the highest level. But federations must know how to capture that value. A player does not automatically become a national team leader because he plays for a major club in Europe or somewhere. The federation needs systems that allow elite experience to influence the entire football ecosystem. Here is the big question. Are we building players or building a football economy? This may be the biggest question facing African football. Africa is producing incredible talents, but are we building the infrastructure around them? Are African clubs benefiting? Are academies being compensated? Are local leagues becoming stronger? Are former players becoming owners, executives, agents, coaches, and investors? Are African football institutions prepared to turn player success into long-term economic growth? Because one thing is clear, the world has discovered the value of African talent. The question is whether Africa is fully prepared to capture the value of African football. The system has given us more transfer headlines. It has given us a glimpse into the future. Yan Diomande to Real Madrid, Carlos Baleba to Manchester United, Ayyoub Bouaddi to Manchester City, Caleb Yirenkyi entering the Premier League environment. These players carry the dreams of their families, the hopes of their nation, and increasingly the commercial expectations of some of the world's most powerful football clubs. But their success should not be measured only by how much money they earn or how many trophies they win. The real question is, what will their success mean for the next generation of African footballers? Will they simply become more examples of African talent leaving the continent? Or will their success help inspire the systems, investment, partnerships, and infrastructure that allow African football to build its own global power? Because the future of African football cannot simply be about exporting players. The future must be about exporting excellence, building infrastructure, creating commercial value, and ensuring that Africa becomes a central player in the global football economy. This is BallAfrica. The players are moving, the money is moving, the global football market is changing, and Africa must decide: will we simply watch the game change, or will we help shape what comes next?